Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an airline pilot, and welcome to today's video explaining GLS approaches. Today we're going to talk about what GLS stands for, how it works, what the advantages are over the current ILS, and then we're going to have a look at how to fly a GLS approach in the simulator and which kind of add-ons actually support GLS approaches. So let's get right into it. GLS, what does the term even stand for? So GLS stands for G-Bus Landing System, and a G-Bus is a ground-based augmentation system. How does it work? So you all know what a GPS is. You've got satellites that are surrounding the Earth, that are traveling in known orbits, and by measuring the distance to each of those satellites, you can determine your position in space accurately if you've got at least 4 satellites available. And this works down to a precision of some 20 or 30 meters-ish. Now, that is insufficient to fly a precision approach, including Autoland capability. So, some genius thought, okay, what if we basically put a GPS satellite onto an airport? And this is how the idea of GLS was born. Now, let's put it into layman's terms so that everyone can understand it. We know that we have a certain position inaccuracy with GPS satellites. Now, the ground-based augmentation system, the G-Bus station at an airport, can measure the inaccuracy that GPS actually delivers at an airport. And remember, due to the satellites moving in orbit, this inaccuracy changes all the time. But the G-Bus station at the airport can measure this inaccuracy, and it then sends a correction signal to approaching aircraft, which enables the computer in the aircraft to calculate its position down to 1 meter accuracy. And that is very, very good. That is enough so that a GLS can be used as a precision approach with an eventual Autoland capability. Now, why do we need these stations at all? What is the big advantage of GLS when we already have ILS? There are 2 major advantages. The first of them is the simplicity of the system. You only need a single station that you position at an airport, and it can serve any and all runways. And if you have 2 airports very close to one another, the typical range of a G-Bus station is 20 nautical miles, so if you have 2 airports next to one another, that G-Bus station can even cover the other airport as well with a single installation. Imagine it like this. We're in San Francisco over here, and San Francisco has 8 possible runways that you can land on. 4 physical runways, all of which can be landed into 2 directions, disregarding the terrain over here. So that means if you want to equip all of those runways with a precision approach system, which currently is an ILS, then you would have to install 8 ILS antennas, which cost money, which need maintenance, and so on. But you can scrap all of those 8 antennas if you put a single G-Bus station at the airport, which ultimately saves millions every year for the airports. Now let's talk about the second advantage, and that's from an operational perspective. So, since a GLS approach is still based on GPS, and since there are no radio waves required that, cannot be bent, or if they can be bent are super expensive and not really effective, the MLS approach refers, microwave landing system, for anyone who wants to look it up. They did experiment with that, but it didn't work. Or rather, it did work, but turned out so expensive that they scrapped it again. So, with a GLS, you are not relying on straight-in approaches. Much rather, you can create curved approaches. This especially comes in handy with modern days RMP equipment, where you have radios to fixed legs, etc., so that you can eventually create precision approaches that would come in circles or in whatever turns you want them to do. Now, nowadays, we don't have regular authority approval for precision approaches that include these kind of features. So GLS approaches are still pretty much straight in, just like ILSs these days. However, GLS is still pretty new, and they are still pretty much exploring the system and testing it at very few airports only. It's around about 100 airports worldwide that support GLS at the moment. Think, for example, San Francisco, Newark, Frankfurt, and more. Now, obviously the advantage of those curved approaches is reducing the noise imprint that they have on the airport area, and therefore reducing emissions and making living next to an airport a little bit more worthwhile. Yes, that might be for you who want to purchase cheap ground or cheap buildings close to an airport. Think about it. Maybe in 20 to 30 years time they will suddenly increase in value if approaches no longer go over it. Alright, but let's go right back into GLS approaches. So for the time being, as we've just figured out, they are mostly straight in and serve in a pretty similar way to ILS approaches. Now, some airports are already experimenting with GLSs. For example, Frankfurt has implemented steeper approach slopes on GLS approaches than they have on some of the ILS approaches. When they built the new northern runway, they included the 3.2 degree glide on an ILS, but for that they need different antennas installed. All of that is expensive, and they don't have that on the other two landing runways. So that's 07 center and 07 right. With GLS, however, they could also implement the 3.2 degree approach slope, since all of the approach itself is calculated within the aircraft's computers. And this leads us to how a GLS approach is eventually flown. So the aircraft receives the correction message from the GBus ground station, and the aircraft then calculates the exact approach slopes. It displays that type of information to the pilot in exactly the same way how an ILS would be displayed. So with LS active over here, we can see that we've got a localizer and a glide slope, and we actually call them localizer and glide slope as well on a GLS approach. If you arm the approach mode, which we'll see in a few moments, you will also see LOC and GS, just like you are used to from an ILS. The only thing that's different is what you see in the lower left of your PFD over here, in that you no longer have an ILS ident like you used to have on ILS approaches, but now you've got the channel. That's basically the channel to which the aircraft tunes to receive the correction message from the GBus ground station. And then you have that identifier over here, Golf 28 Alpha, which you've got to check on here to ensure that you're actually receiving the correct GBus station. The DME is your typical DME, nothing more to say about that. So that's the basics of how GLS is shown to the pilot. So basically it works exactly the same way like an ILS, and that includes the angular functions of the glide slope and the localizer. So the closer you get to the airport, the smaller is one dot deviation. That means you can fly the approach exactly like you can fly an ILS. The only difference is that it's all calculated within the aircraft computers based on the GPS satellite signals and the GBus ground station. Now let's go ahead and release the active pause over here so that we can start to fly the approach. We're currently inbound for the GLS runway 28 right in San Francisco, and we've just been cleared for the approach. So let's press the approach button, and we can also engage the second autopilot. And you can see glide slope and localizer are in blue. We get the Land 3 dual, autopilot 1 and 2. Now, GLS can be used for automatic landings. However, they are currently not approved for that, except for some trials. So most operators are still required to fly the approach down to a Cat 1 minimum, but you can still perform an autoland of it, provided that sufficient suitable references can be established and maintained. So we have lock star. With that we're intercepting the extended centerline, or we're intercepting the localizer. We still call it localizer on GLS approaches. And with this, we can just spend a small time to look at the approach minimum down here. So we can see the minimum is 200 feet above the ground. So basically, it's the same as an ILS Cat 1 minimum, as GLS works to the same accuracy. However, in case of the Airbus A350, Airbus demands that the GLS approach must not be continued automatically below 200 feet, unless you have special approval from the authority In that case, you can fly it down to 100 feet. But at the moment, we don't have Autoland approval. However, Autoland systems are already installed on the A350 for GLS, so we are going to have a look at that today. Remember, no ground signals over here. This is all calculated right on the aircraft, which is pretty cool. So let's start slowing down. We're 11 miles from the from the airport right now. And we can simply fly the GLS approach the very same way how we would fly the ILS approach. So, flaps 1, speed checked, flaps 1. It is worth reading the charts, by the way. For example, over here, we can see that the VGSI, fancy term for a puppy, and the GLS glide path are not coincident. So we are not going to arrive on a puppy that shows us 2 whites, 2 reds, but we might arrive slightly different. And these kind of changes do happen quite a bit on GLS approaches, so you gotta pay good attention to that, and don't be surprised if you don't end up where you expected to end up on the puppies. So we have glide slope capture. Go around altitude 3,200 feet set. And this way, we are just flying a standard approach like we would do for pretty much any ILS as well. In terms of the operation, once you're established, no difference at all. Alright, flaps 2, and gear down. So, flaps 3, speed checked, flap 3, and flaps full, speed checked, flaps full. So, we do want to do config full today, not config 3, misselected that in here. Alright, so, let's complete our landing checklist. Then, cabin crew advised, auto thrust, speed, auto brake, medium, runway condition, dry, landing checklist complete. So there's our airport. And interestingly enough, in the simulator we even arrive exactly on the puppy. Well, gonna take it, not going to complain about it. And we will just let the aircraft fly all the way down to an Autoland. Now you might ask yourself, how is the aircraft able to land itself, do an automatic landing, if you don't have an ILS? Now, that's quite simple. The ILS in an Autoland is only used in order to bring the aircraft onto the centerline and onto the correct height above the runway threshold. From there, the radio altimeter takes over, and the aircraft calculates the flare based on the radio altimeter and not based on any of the ILS data. Therefore, as long as the position accuracy is great enough, aka as long as we have the accuracy of 1 meter from the G-bus system, the aircraft will perfectly be able to land itself without any, let's say, without any ground-based information except for the G-bus station. Theoretically, if we were able to calculate the position precise enough that we could calculate it down to that 1 meter accuracy without any ground stations, then the aircraft would actually be able to auto-land itself, like, anywhere. So, land. And now let's see how this is going to work. Checked. Remember, you must still use the Cat 1 minima, even if you do an auto-land here. Continue. But that's just due to regulatory approvals at the moment.
100, 50, 40,
Flare.
30, 20,
retard,
10, 5.
Look at that. Spoilers, reverse green, brake medium. Absolutely perfect, isn't it? That's how well you can do an automatic landing using a G-bus system. And that's how you can already see how much of a success the GLS is going to become in the future. Now let's take a few moments to talk about which types of aircraft support GLS at the moment. So, of course, we've got the Airbus A350, as we can see over here, and the A380 also comes with GLS by default. Likewise, the Boeing 787 is also equipped with GLS by default. For a lot of other aircraft, there are retrofits available. Think, for example, about the Boeing 737. If you've got an aircraft with a multimode receiver, then chances are you can also fit a GLS into that aircraft. The A320 also has it available, retrofitted, the A330 does, the 747 does, so you can see that a lot of aircraft are capable of conducting GLS approaches these days. However, let's now talk about flight simulation. So what do you need in flight simulation in order to be able to conduct a GLS approach? So, most importantly, you need an add-on that supports it and a nav database that supports it. For instance, the default nav databases of Flight Simulator 2020 and 2024 do not support GLS approaches. You need the Navigraph database in order to have GLS available in your FMS. Next, you need an add-on that supports it, and at the moment there are only very few of them available. You have the iniBuilds Airbus A350, which is the only FS 2024 aircraft that supports GLS properly, including the Autoland at the moment. Then you have the Flight Sim Labs Airbus, which also has GLS capability. And that's about it already in terms of the good and complex add-ons. Some low-tier add-ons have some sort of GLS, but nothing to take serious. It's really only the iniBuilds Airbus A350 and the Flight Sim Labs Airbus A321 that have GLS capability at the moment. Not Phoenix, not PMDG, none of them has it available at the moment. Well, and that's our quick dive into GLS. Thank you very much for watching. Be sure to leave your feedback in the comments underneath the video. I'm looking forward to them and looking forward to hear your take on GLS if you've tried it already and how you liked it. Thank you very much for watching. As always, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel. And if you really appreciate what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you for watching, and I'm looking forward to see you all again on the next one.